Welcome back from the break. We'll get started on our next session, which is we're going to hear from two technology companies about some of the ways to get to net zero emissions. So I'm going to invite Chris Davis up and Dr. Jana Naithrufa. Thank you. Chris is going to speak first. So I'm going to give you a little introduction on him. He's the Vice President of Carbon Sequestration for Milestone Carbon, who is leading the development and growth of the company's carbon sequestration business unit from project development to execution and expansion. So we're going to hear from Chris right now.
Thanks, Brandy. Can everybody hear me? Great. Okay. So my name's Chris Davis, and I'm happy to be here with you today. It's great to see so many folks out today. I want to thank Hart Energy for hosting this conference. I think it's great for all of us to start coming together and sharing some more ideas around how we can. Let me slow some of this down here, guys. So just by way of background here, so Milestone Environmental Services actually operates the largest network of oil waste management infrastructure in the Permian, Haynesville, and Eagle Ford. And I joined Milestone back in July of 2021 to help stand up and port over those capabilities into carbon sequestration. So we're actually developing carbon sequestration sites in the lower 48. I had a career in the upstream for about 20 years, 17 of which was with ExxonMobil, and I lived around the world. And so some of these pictures you're seeing here that are just cycling through are just a reminder, and I know many of us talk about this a lot, but we need to share it more, the importance of having access to reliable, affordable energy and the connection that has with global standards of living. When I was 20, I actually started living abroad for the first time. I lived in Portugal and then moved to the Cape Verde Islands. Not many people know where that's at, but it's sort of the birthplace for hurricanes, and it's right off the coast of Senegal. And they had one building in the island that I lived on that had a diesel generator with enormous plumes of smoke coming out of it, and we had power occasionally. And it reflected in everything else that we saw on the island, access to good health care, which there wasn't, and just access to clean water and food, which was intermittent at best as well. And so it made a big impression on me at an early age. I traveled to Asia Pacific, worked there for a while, worked in Europe for about 6 years, and then more recently I was in South America working on assets in the Vaca Muerta. And I've had a great opportunity to come in contact with carbon capture about half the time in my career. So I started on the technology side, moved into infrastructure, and then later subsurface, reservoir engineering, designing injection wells. And what I've learned really is that our industry has a really rich tradition of innovating, developing technologies, and then figuring out ways to deploy that technology to meet the challenges that society asks of us. So access to these reliable fuels, again, we need to share this more with people because there's people who are involved in policymaking that sometimes don't fully appreciate the importance of the role that hydrocarbon fuels play in the energy slate and the energy mix. We're going to be producing hydrocarbons for years to come. I think that's been covered today, and it's important. But producing hydrocarbons and reducing our carbon emissions are not mutually exclusive goals. And that's why we need to talk more about technologies like carbon capture. It's been around for a long time. Really, we have the beverage industry probably to thank for it. Over 2 centuries ago, Schweppes in England was using carbon dioxide to carbonate beverages. And one of my fond memories growing up was I grew up in North Dallas area. I'd go to Kroger, we'd get some dry ice, root beer extract, sugar, water, and you can make your own root beer and enjoy all the fog that comes out on the kitchen floor. The oil and gas industry has been obviously using CO2 for enhanced recovery for many decades now, and it's been done safely and reliably. And that's really why it's our industry that needs to take a leading position in deployment and investment in carbon capture. And it's not that we're not doing anything. I mean, there's been a number of projects announced, like we've heard. So there was at least almost 50 projects in 2021 that were announced. And we're going to need much more than that. And that's, again, more messages that were covered earlier today. What I would say, though, is that there are many critics of CCS out there. And we need to listen and understand their arguments because I think some of them will resonate. And one of those is, well, if there's such enthusiasm, technical capability, and willingness to invest, where are all these projects? Why aren't we seeing more of them being deployed? And that's something that we have the capability to address as an industry. So I want to talk about at least 6 ways we can do that we can start to accelerate deployment and development of carbon capture projects here in the United States. What I would say too is that we may not all agree on the ways that we need to approach this problem, and that's perfectly fine. We need some constructive debate in this area. What I'll also say is that I think we're starting in different places to solve the problem to meet climate objectives. That's also okay, and actually it's very necessary. Some of us are going to be working on projects that might have much longer planning cycles. Milestone feels like we can contribute by working on lower complexity projects that have much shorter planning cycles that will allow us to deploy projects and, in a sense, buy time for some of these larger, more meaningful projects to be invested in. So I think we first need to start by thinking big. There's some great announcements around hub projects, massive infrastructure, offshore sequestration sites, around industrial areas off the Gulf Coast, off of the North Sea, and many other locations around the world. If you haven't had a chance to see the Princeton University's Net Zero America report, I would highly encourage you to look at it. CCS features prominently in there, and they talk about how CCS might evolve going forward. So this is 2 maps that come out of that report. So first is the existing CO2 pipeline network that we have in the lower 48 today. Over 5,000 miles of pipeline has been transporting about 80 million tons per year of carbon dioxide. We're going to need a network that can transport billions of tons, gigatons of carbon dioxide to meet the climate objectives we're after. And so you'll see here on the map on the right, really large trunk lines that are developed over time that are connecting these point source emissions and taking them to these gray basins, which have suitable geology for long-term storage and disposal. I always thought that these big projects were really attractive because I can use scale to reduce my costs. But what's hidden in these big projects is increased risks and complexity. And you don't have to look any further than the Keystone XL pipeline to see how a project that looks like it should come together and has a lot of aligned parties can fall apart or be obstructed at the last minute. And so while we need to think big, thinking big to me means planning for growth. We really need to start small with that bigger picture in mind. And that's, again, where Milestone feels like we can make a contribution here. We operate about a dozen different oil field waste disposal sites, including wells and landfills, and we're focused on the lowest cost of capture sources of emissions. So those were talked about today. The chart on the right down here gives you just another illustration. And every facility, it depends, is always the right answer. So is my facility $50 a ton to capture or $40 a ton to capture? Well, it just depends on the particulars of that facility. But what we do know is that areas where we have high concentrations of CO2 are going to be among the lowest costs for capture. Still, we see some folks that think it's actually the absolute volume that is going to drive down the costs. But what you'll find is that sources that have the largest volumes of emissions per year are also still among the highest in terms of cost of capture. And again, it all comes down to purity of CO2 and concentration. And this is where our industry, we have to step up and step into this space because we have a great track record, a rich tradition of developing technology, deploying it, and then optimizing it to reduce the costs. Just in the past 10 years, if we think about unconventional well costs in the major basins here, we've seen reductions in well costs up to 50%. Think about the different sources of emissions you could capture if we could cut the cost by half. It's basically every source. Yes, there's some technological challenges. There's a bunch of engineers and scientists in this room and elsewhere who are working on those. We can do it. Beyond the cost, we need to think more broadly about value. I was really happy to hear more dialogue and discussion about the voluntary markets, carbon offsets. We have a lot of talk about 45Q, so that'll be the 46th time we've mentioned it maybe. There's going to be more sources of value that need to be brought to bear for these projects to become viable. Every LNG developer right now is thinking about how can I deliver carbon neutral or low carbon LNG cargoes to my Asian or European buyers, because that's what they're demanding now. And so all of them are having to come up with a CCS solution that's going to create a change in price, a premium or a demium, depending on what product you're selling. All of those components need to be brought to bear as we think about how do we distribute the value among the stakeholders. And finally, with ESG metrics, all of us are being held to a higher standard today, and I would say that's probably going to continue and will become our license to operate going forward. And if we don't do it ourselves, there'll be other bodies, government and regulatory, who will do it for us. So it's important that we be proactive in this space. I don't want to belabor this. There's plenty of other experts on 45Q and tax policy. What I will say, though, is we're very fortunate to have a foundation that can help get some of these projects off the starting blocks today. Clearly, there's more we can do to enhance and streamline policy to support more projects. And on the right in this table are just a few thoughts here. Extending the project dates. In some cases, if you're trying to permit a Class 6 well, so an underground injection control permit for CO2 sequestration, you may exceed the timeline before you can even qualify for 45Q. So we need to think through, are we opening the aperture enough for some of these longer planning cycle projects to be able to take advantage of the policies that are in place today? The last thing on the page here I'll go to is really around the long-term liability. Capturing carbon dioxide, disposing of it, it is a societal problem. So there's clearly a role for society through the government to play a part. And after a site has been developed and safely operated, after it's been closed and shown to be designed with integrity and shown that the plume is where it is, we should be able to hand that over to a competent body or authority to watch it for the long term, to monitor. That's going to actually enable us to get more projects off the ground. And I think we need to spend time looking at the models that North Dakota and Wyoming have adopted. I want to say, regulators have a very difficult job. They're under-resourced, and they're being given very ambitious tasks like protect the environment, protect the air, protect our drinking water, with limited resources. And so, as an industry, we need to honor and understand the objectives they're trying to uphold and find a way to work within that. And the invitation goes the other way. We need regulators to reach out to industry and invite us to come in and help to think about, is there a smarter, better way to get to the objective we're trying to meet? We've been injecting CO2 for a long time now. We've been injecting CO2 with hydrogen sulfide. That's lethal. Nobody wants that to come back and leak back at us. But we can dispose of those through different classifications of wells, and those wells take much less time to permit. We need to think about, are there ways that we could streamline and manage the permitting cycle to get us down to less than the 4+ years that we're hearing right now? We need to start somewhere. So perfection is the enemy of progress. I want to just say, it's not that we're trying to do anything that's not perfect or safe or reliable. That's not what we're after here. But what I would say is that I read this week that the iPod is being discontinued. I'm sure most of us in here had an iPod at one point. Do you think there was an iPhone if not for an iPod? You got to start somewhere. And so we're saying that there's lower complexity, faster projects that can be deployed, and we don't need to wait on the project that has 10 different facilities that moves tens of millions of tons per year. Because if we keep waiting for those projects, we're going to lose faith with those who have put money out there in policy for us to get started. And so we need to figure out a way to have some quick wins, some early successes, and allow for more time to get these bigger projects off the ground. So these are just 6 ideas, and we encourage and want to be a part of this space with others who are developing projects. I love that we're talking about collaboration a lot more, that this is still an industry, a part of the industry where we're trying to partner and figure out how can we solve this together. And I think that's clearly the right approach, and Milestone wants to work with other developers, emitters, stakeholders, asset owners who feel similarly. So thank you very much.
All right, I'll put it up. Thank you, Chris. Up next is Dr. Jana, who's the Vice President of Industrial Process Solutions for the Americas at Siemens Energy. And his focus is on an interest lie in developing tailored, sustainable solutions to process industries in their decarbonization journey. So please welcome Dr. Jana.
Can you hear me okay? Again, first, thank you all, and thank you for the opportunity. I know I'm one of the last presenters between you and the cocktail lounge, so I'll keep it interesting. And Chris, thank you very much for the way you have set it up, because thinking big, looking at the bigger picture, and having these open conversations are critical. And several of the points that Chris made are very close to what we are working on. KXL, for example, we have been involved in KXL. We have been involved in LNG, low carbon LNG or e-LNG opportunities. So a little bit, I'll give you a view of who we are, what we are doing in the technology space to be able to support customers with unique solutions in their decarb journey, wherever they are as part of this. So who are we? So Siemens Energy we are a 90,000 people strong company that is involved in the entire energy portfolio. So from upstream, midstream, downstream to energy generation, transmission, distribution, new energy value chain, and also all the other industries that are what I would say energy intensive: pulp, paper, sugar, ammonia, hydrogen, and the whole mix. So we have this unique position in the country to be able to, and in the world, to be able to look at the full energy portfolio and develop solutions for each customer based on their unique needs. And how do we go about doing it? So we typically look at the whole mix in terms of three big areas as customers move towards their decarbonization journey. So we look at first segment is in terms of increasing efficiency, which helps you reduce your carbon footprint. And we have several technological drivers that we are working on, both internally and also in terms of co-creation with customers. And you see a lot of the ones that you would recognize with efficiency in prime movers, efficiency in terms of compression and transmission and so forth. The next segment that we look at are focused on is in terms of the fuel shift, with customers who are ready to take the next step to go into either mixing of fuels from carbon-based to hydrogen, the whole blending process to go into storage, whether it is thermal storage or battery storage. That whole process, we are there to be able to support them in terms of their technology needs, electrification, automation, digitalization of the entire process. And we have multiple use cases to be able to support customers develop their own unique proposition for that particular space. And then, of course, you have those customers who have well into their deep decarb efforts that we can also support, where we have our own silencers to produce hydrogen, if you want to go all the way there, with zero carbon fuels, but also in terms of being able to support with sector coupling, power to X conversations. So if you look at it, it's a big, broad portfolio, and I picked a few that we can touch upon, along with some examples on how we have been able to take our 90,000 strong intellectual capital that we have in the company to be able to develop bespoke solutions for customers. And they range from fossil fuel substitution to electrification in terms of removing prime movers that are using carbon-based fuel to completely going the electrical route, and everything in between. And also specifically for our interests with respect to gas fields and field management, we have process solutions that help with carbon capture, that also help with reducing flaring, process optimization, and of course, the entire energy consulting portfolio that we have to offer. In looking at some of these things, where does innovation play, right? How do we drive the innovation engine as part of this unique company in the world? Because I can say that there is nobody out there who has this entire breadth of portfolio that Siemens Energy has. And so we have this unique position in the market to be able to see the entire value chain and create technological advances to be able to support in different parts of the value chain. So some of the innovations that we have, which would be of specific interest, are one is our real-time production optimization. This is our digital intelligent optimization platform that we have developed and deployed in fields across the world to support customers with optimization of their production, gas treatment, and their associated facilities. It helps customers reduce their carbon footprint because it improves their efficiency, and also helps with reducing flaring to zero. And that's our goal as well, as to how do you produce, as Chris mentioned, carbon-based fuel is still going to be there for many years. So how do we support customers in being able to go down that path of decarb while still being a key fuel for the world for several years to come? How do we go about doing this? So one of the things that we have is our technology capability to be able to develop a very tailored digital twin. We work with the customer specific to their facility, incorporate our domain knowledge and our digital tools to develop a digital twin that can be used to run scenarios, to develop optimization algorithms to reduce carbon fuel consumption as part of their entire production facility. And it also helps with real-time management and real-time optimization of their production. And the tool is intelligent enough to be able to support even forced outage situations. So if, for example, which is one of the real concerns or worries of operators is how do we handle when there are forced outage situations? How do you still limit your carbon footprint and fugitive emissions? And our intelligence, our expert system as part of the optimization tool is able to support customers with being able to react quickly to unplanned events and still drive an optimized production of the entire facility. And we have multiple use cases where we have been able to implement and drive significant benefits for customers. The other specific example that I'd like to talk to you about is, I went through all the details here, so quickly. The other one, which we are especially proud of, is our spontaneous leak detection system, which actually last year won the Hart Energy Innovation Award for the way we are able to detect leaks in pipelines with a very non-intrusive digital method. And this leverages our IoT platform and is able to provide a significant benefit over existing systems that are out there for leak detection. And this can be actually used either by itself as a standalone system to be able to detect leaks, or be added on as an additional level of security on top of what other systems customers might already have, whether it is fiber optics or other visual methods. And some of the key advantages of this are speed. So we can detect leaks in seconds. We need to have the monitoring stations 15 to 20 miles apart, but we are able to detect leaks within 20 to 50 feet of the leak. And we are also able to detect leaks down to 1/8 of an inch. So imagine the impact of such a system in areas such as high consequence areas where there is a lot of regulatory requirement that is coming up. There is a lot of imposition on operators. And this is yet another example of how we are using our domain knowledge, our capability in terms of digital infrastructure to drive innovations to be able to support specific areas of focus that customers are encountering in their path towards net zero. Another example is, okay, it's moving. All right. Sorry. Okay, there you go. I know this is, the other aspect that we want to talk about is specifically with respect to carbon capture, right? There are several areas that we are focusing on with operators to be able to reduce the way that they or improve the efficiency of carbon capture, and also reduce the approach and the cost that it takes to get to that carbon capture front. And one of the key products that we have again, it's more of an innovation that came about from the need, is our heat pumps. And we have been able to use it in very unique areas. Like, for example, if you take an amine-based carbon capture technology plant, there is a very heavy load as part of the boiler system to be able to supply hot water or to the amine system. Now, it uses almost 10% of the entire plant's energy is being used for that particular boiler system. We have been able to use our heat pump to take heat from the compressor that compresses carbon dioxide into liquid form, and use that heat to be able to augment the boiler and reduce the total net energy usage for the boiler. So not only are we able to support the carbon capture, but also we are reducing the energy required to even perform the carbon capture. So it's more secondary, tertiary thought process that goes into being able to perform these innovations that we feel as a strength. And we are working with multiple customers and multiple other technology partners like Linde and others to be able to drive the innovations in these areas. So just a few examples of what we are doing to be able to support this drive towards net zero from a technology company. And there are quite a few more, and I have one of my experts here in the back, Ron Salas. He will be able to provide you a little bit more detail as well on some of these systems as well as others that we have in development. And we are looking for partners as well. As Chris was mentioning, we are also looking for partners in being able to develop these technologies together, because a lot of what we have found is that the technology development ends up being very unique for a particular customer's need. So we have some baseline experts and baseline systems already developed, but every time we have an application, it tends to be very specific, and that's where we're also looking for partnerships, and we're also looking to be able to push that boundary further into the decarb space. So again, just a quick spiel on who we are and how we can help in this space. Welcome any questions, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Jana. We do have time for a little Q&A, so if y'all have any questions to submit, please do. I do see one on here, so I'm going to read it. Okay. I think this is for you, Chris. In order to obtain thousands of miles in ROW, we will need to, we will need landowner acceptance. How, in your opinion, do we get landowners to support us when we have had multiple ROWs affecting their properties?
Yeah, so the landowner engagement, particularly for onshore U.S., is it's one of the critical path activities that has to be resolved, and so the more landowners that we have to get an agreement with, that obviously introduces a lot more complexity and risk to projects. And so where we found some success is where we're trying to limit the footprint on a landowner's parcel, and so we're looking at developments that would be multi-well developments where we have very limited pipeline infrastructure necessary, We talk to them in terms of getting them to get familiar with the projects and talk about how proven and demonstrable these projects have been. Oftentimes, we're looking for, so there's right-of-way, but we're also looking for pore space. And so we're looking particularly for pore space that has very few, if any, artificial penetrations from other wells. And so many times these landowners may not have been able to benefit from a lot of resource development on their acreage. And so we're finding that as we look for those spots that are conducive to disposal in aquifers, we're also finding that those are landowners that are very amenable to doing the developments in some parts because they haven't seen a lot of financial benefits from resources.
Thank you, Chris. I'll ask you this next question. What impact, if any, will smaller CCS, carbon capture and storage projects, have on the larger carbon capture hub and infrastructure projects? Sorry.
For me to protect Jen? Okay.
Or,
I'll go first. So I think this is really where I was starting. They're not really competing, they're actually complementary. And so we're actually having discussions with larger project developers about co-investing in common infrastructure. So if there's a big pipeline header that we think could make sense for an onshore project, but also potentially bootstrap another bigger project, maybe an offshore project, we definitely want to have those discussions because that's a great way to share some of that risk up front and also buy more time for these bigger projects.
And the point about there is a place for both in the way we have seen it. And it's because it's still early on, and a lot of customers are still experimenting with what kind of a infrastructure they can put forth from a carbon capture perspective. So small projects, like Chris was mentioning, will end up being the way we bootstrap larger ones. And it's almost like you have to prove from a domain knowledge and domain expertise, these smaller projects end up get to a point of sustainability and then leverage for larger ones. And that's the way we are seeing, whether it is carbon capture or ELNG or anything that is moving customers towards net zero, they are looking at smaller projects from a pilot basis, demonstrate, prove, meet requirements, and see if they can use that to scale.
Thank you. This is for you, Dr. Johnner. This next question, does your real-time optimization tool include controller loop tuning? And if this is not the case, how does the impact compressor uptime when trying to optimize system?
It's a good question for Ron. I'm sorry? Yeah, it does.
It does.
Yeah.
How about this one? With current CO2 shortages in the U.S., why do you think everyone is talking about storage and not utilization? And who wants to go? Chris?
Go ahead, you start.
Okay. So I think from a storage as well as utilization, right? First, they are looking at from a capture perspective, what does it mean to be able to capture it and store it in some form? Because we are still a little further out in terms of using that for large-scale production. So before we can move into a complete 100% utilization and drive large-scale production from a carbon capture, sequestration, and utilization, the sequestration part of it is where a lot of focus is on because you need the ability to be able to store before we can really leverage the storage for utilization needs. And technology is still in the process development. A lot of companies like Linde and others are working on utilization, like the amine plant that I talked about. But from a capture perspective, I think that's more near term that they are looking at, and that's where the focus is right now. That's what we are seeing from a technology company, what customers are looking for us to help them with.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we need to be thinking in terms of a multiplicity of solutions here. So we need more research in the utilization and use cases for CO2. It's imperative that they be able to scale, right? So we're thinking of a problem, we're talking about emissions between 50 and 60 gigatons, billions of tons per year. And right now, we're between 100 million and 200 million of CCS capacity, tons per year, trying to get to 500. And so we need to get to billions of tons, and so we need utilization cases that can scale to those kinds of levels, hundreds of millions of tons or more.
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Dr. Jana. We are out of time, so
Randy.
appreciate your time and answering these questions.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.